Good evening. Nice to see you. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Night's program where we talk to reporters and writers and journalists and editors to find out what they're thinking about, what they're writing about, give you a little insight as to what's going on in the world of journalism and, of course, in our home borough of the Bronx. And in our second segment today, we've got a book that is almost like a self-help book, but it really has great advice for a lot of us who are going through some difficult things. But we'll deal with that in a moment. Right now, I am thrilled. He knows I'm thrilled that Joe Hirsch, the editor of the Mott Haven Herald and the Hunts Point Express, is with us. Nice to see you, Joe.
Nice to see you, Gary.
Joe, but before we get started, just so people know, the Mott Haven Herald and Hunts Point Express have an unusual, let's say, personnel group that works on it. Just give a little background for people who don't know, because they may see the Mott Haven Herald and Hunts Point Express online and then say, who are these people? So who are the people that work on the paper?
So the publications have been around covering the South Bronx neighborhoods, the adjacent neighborhoods of Mott Haven, Melrose, Port Morris, Hunts Point, Longwood for 17 years, since
Wow,
2006.
I didn't even realize it.
And we started out with strictly the Hunts Point Express, and it was reported on by undergraduates in the journalism and communications program at Hunter College. A couple of years later, we added the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism to the roster, and so the grad students started covering Mott Haven, and there we expanded from the Hunts Point Express to the Mott Haven Herald. So we cover both of those southern Bronx community districts with about 150,000 people in the districts. And from semester to semester, our staff changes depending on the students who are enrolled in our classes covering the neighborhoods for us. And I have been editing the papers over these years.
As you know, and as viewers of this program know, we've had a number of those budding journalists on the program. What I'm most excited about is many of them come from other places and come to the Bronx and say, wait a minute, there's a lot going on here that nobody knows about. And some have said they want to stay. Others are simply inspired. And it's almost like helps promote the Bronx elsewhere. And I just think it's fabulous.
And many of the people who have reported for us, the graduate students that we've had, have gone on to do things based on the reporting that they did for the Herald and the Express. For example, there was we had one guy who was who is around 30, who had come from Maine, and his whole career had worked as a caterer and had never done journalism before, but got so into reporting about waste management, treatment, and sometimes the corruption, sometimes simply about the environmental problems created in his coverage of our waterfront industrialized area, that he turned that into a career as the editor of a publication about the trash industry, and he is now chasing after those companies.
We inspire people all the time here in the Bronx. Anyway, a perfect segue. You wrote a piece: federal funds will help establish climate resiliency hubs in the South Bronx. Young people will lead the way. I thought it was fantastic that our friends at Nos Cadamos have been given a grant. Tell us all about that and what this is all about, especially if it involves Bronx young people. Gets me right here.
Right. Well, the young people is certainly the core of what's going on here, because the NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, was taking applications over the last few years for projects to try to fight climate change across the country, and they accepted a mere 5% of the grant applicants. And among those was Nos Quedamos, the venerable, long-serving grassroots organization in Melrose that has been around for about 30 years, and that started out as an organization that helped build housing in the burned-out section of Melrose for many years, but has branched out to be involved in other grassroots initiatives, and the environment is high on their agenda. And so they pitched, and they applied to the NOAA for a grant to create resiliency hubs.
Mhm.
And so they were one of only 5% of applicants nationwide that the NOAA accepted, and they're going to be receiving
Wow.
$440,000 to implement this program over the
And
next.
what are they going to do with all that money? It's a lot, for an organization like that. That's a significant, for any organization, really. It's a significant amount of money.
That's right, and the representative from the high-ranking exec from NOAA came out to say, in fact, that Nos Quedamos was the first organization in the Bronx to receive such an award, and they are going to create resiliency hubs in 3 locations: one at a community garden in Hunts Point on the Hunts Point
Okay.
Peninsula, another in Mott Haven at 138th Street, and one at the Nos Quedamos headquarters, where they are going to have renewable energy, and they are going to have gardens and grow food, and they are going to serve food, and they're going to have fresh water, and they're going to have cooling. So these are 3 centers that are specifically geared to try to help out in the event of the kind of climate emergencies that we have been seeing more and more of. And the key facet that distinguishes this from other types of similar programs is the fact that there are a dozen young people, primarily in their teens, who are spearheading it and who are going to be presenting, who are going to be organizing locally, and who are going to be creating and hosting events.
Let me just add that there are pockets of places, especially on the shorelines, like City Island, and certainly down in Hunts Point, who got hit during the storms. And maybe people on the interior say, well, that's not me. Well, listen, I live in Van Cortlandt Village, and the Major Deegan Expressway was flooded out during a storm. There's nobody's safe. You sent us a video which I want to show. It's short, but you'll get an example if you look at this, folks. Anderson's going to play it for us, of kids who get it, who are understanding and ready to tell a story. So let's take a quick look at that.
So this is a cooling station.
Speak up. Speak up.
To basically make a room cooler or any place cooler. So what this does is inside there's a insulator. Where there's an insulator there to maintain the coolness. So when we put, let's say, ice in there, a bag of ice, we close it with this and we put the lid on, and we put a fan on there. To put the fan will conduct the air outside, the warm air, the ice and the insulator will be cool, and then the tube right here will direct the air to the room or to the place where you put this. It will throw cool air into the room.
I'm applauding because basically, for families who aren't fortunate enough to have air conditioning, how brilliant. I mean, and these are our Bronx kids. So basically, they put the ice in there, they put holes in there, they put the fan on top, just like the fan in our air conditioners, and it blows it out.
And they put 3 pipes out the side, and they fasten the pipes to the outside of the paint jar, of the paint bucket, and the cool air blows out, and that's the best people can do. This
is it's worth $440,000. I'll tell you that. Just fantastic. I was going to mention to you before the show, Nos Quedamos is one of the legendary organizations that we just featured on Bronx Talk because they opened up 1 month before BronxNet opened up on its we're on our 30th year. So we were both on our 30th year, and we talked to Nos Quedamos about housing and all the other things they do. Anyway, so that was one story. Another story I wanted to mention, and you were telling me about, I wasn't aware of this jail barge, which has been out there. You were saying that it's going to be closing, and people have been calling for it to be closed for a very long time. What is the status of that? And is there a story coming out, or is it out? I didn't see.
There's a story up on the Hunts Point Express that was just done by Stephen Wenzel, a reporter of ours, and it was just posted up on our site as of this morning.
Okay.
And it is.
And by the way, we're recording this on 9/11, Monday, 9/11. Go ahead.
Yes. So the Vernon C. Bain Center.
That's it.
was was moored in the East River, behind what subsequently became the fish market, as part of the sprawling Hunts Point food distribution market. And it was back in the early 1990s. The jail barge was put there because the population at Rikers was so extensive at the jail complex on Rikers Island was so out of control that they had no place to put the inmates, and so they put this barge in the East River, and so inmates have been placed.
Housed there.
Have been putting inmates in the jail barge, really out of sight, out of mind of everybody, because it's in the industrialized area of Hunts Point, far from.
Let's put it this way: it's one of many issues at Rikers Island, and as part of the whole correctional facility out there.
So so for many years, advocates. It should be pointed out too that, of course, Spofford, what they called Spofford, which was in fact the Bridges Juvenile Justice Center on Spofford Avenue in Hunts Point, was one of only 2 juvie jails in the left open in the entire city before that was closed in 2011. So it's hardly unique for Hunts Point to be facing issues of jails that are obsolete.
I don't want to run out of time, but so basically it's going to be closed, and then the question is, what's it going to be? Now we know that Spofford was turned into
housing.
What should be a very wonderful housing project, affordable housing and everything else. But you were telling me before the show that there is some concern that this could become migrant housing. For me, that's not a big problem, but I don't know.
Well, here's
about a minute.
Okay, status is that they're closing the jail next month. They're going to be closing it in October. It's not yet clear what the date is. The correctional facility won't say. And the 500 inmates in the barge are going to be moved to Rikers Island, along with the 200 or so correction officers. The jail abolitionists are irate at the fact that the inmates are going to be moved to Rikers. But at the same time, the closing of the barge is something that the elected officials and residents of the neighborhood, that everybody has been behind. Everybody wants the jail barge closed because it's an abomination.
But then what it's going to become is going to become the problem.
Nobody knows what it's going to become, and some in the advocacy community are fearful that the city is going to figure out a way to harbor people and that means potentially migrants, given the question about the issue of housing migrants.
And listen, and it's a huge question. Joe Hirsch, Mott Haven editor, Mott Haven Herald and Hunts Point Express. You're the best. Thank you so much. Please come back. You will. I know you told me in a couple of weeks I got something else. We'll get you back, and we'll get some of your reporters here as well.
I'll be here. I'll be there, Gary.
You'll be everywhere. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to try to be the difference. That's the name of the book. And there's a couple of Bronx authors on there. Should be interesting. Don't go away.
¿Qué color? Perfecto, mijo.
Gracias. Thank you.
What's wrong, mijo?
Donating to a pet's medical care is one of the many ways you can help families in your community. Pets and people belong together. Learn more at petsandpeopletogether.org.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
Like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Thanks to Joe for doing all the great work he does. I am real excited about this. This is the difference. And so we're going to welcome 3 different people. We're going to welcome Carl Fix Jr. Nice to see you, Carl.
Nice to see you, Gary.
We also have Melissa Smith. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And
Thank you.
my friend, and let's be honest, my neighbor, is Dr. Lynn Maureen Hurdle. Nice to see you as always. It's
See you
nice to see you
too.
here instead of in the elevator, but that's
Yes.
another story. But I want to start this. This is a fascinating book, and I'm going to present it in this way. I attended Mayor Adams put together like these community visioning things where it wasn't him. He would send a representative to meet with people, and they didn't talk about issues and they didn't talk about politics. They wanted to find out who people are. And I attended one, and they went around the room, people talking very honestly about their lives. Every single person in that room, Bronx people, had something to say that was dramatic and maybe traumatic about their lives. So one young woman who, goodness gracious, couldn't be more than 25, talked about her fiance who or got ill right away and died, and her life has never been the same. Another young man said, my older brother was my idol, and then at some point he got ill and he passed. Another person said, I didn't get into the Bronx High School of Science, and my neighbors criticized me because I ended up going to DeWitt Clinton High School instead. And that was a revelation to me, like, wait a minute, what's wrong with me? Every single person had something. When I read this, I say, wait a minute, every person who wrote an essay here had something that happened to them and they had to find their way. This is the premier self-help book. So Carl, let's just start with you. Who put this together? How'd you find, how did we find the authors? And just let's talk in general about the difference.
Sure. Thank you, Gary. And again, thanks for having us on. This book is the brainchild of Akim Novak. And he had the idea and invited one of his friends and colleagues in South Florida, Rosemary Ravenel, invited her in, and the two decided to co-edit, and each invited a few friends and others that they've gotten to know over the years. And the prompt was there an event or a series of events that made a difference in your life? That was a seemingly simple prompt, but it really isn't. And they invited us, there are 8 contributing authors, to submit an essay, 3,500 plus or minus words on that prompt. And that's what we did. And Akim and Rosemary, during the process, realized that the essays fell into really 3 buckets: loss, courage, and personal transformation. So that's how they organized the book. And they found that they were so moved by the essays that they decided to contribute their own. And they, in fact, I do not believe that was the plan at the outset, but that's the way it unfolded. So there are 10 essays.
There are 10. It is funny that you say it that way, because in your own, you repeat a few times, I thought this was my saving grace until it wasn't. And that seems to have been the theme going around. So Melissa Smith, let's just talk to you. You are a women's boxing historian, the author of The History of Women's Boxing, the first comprehensive narrative of the sport. The Ring magazine called it the Bible of women's boxing. Well, if you've done all that, what's the problem?
Well, I had a lifelong love affair with boxing, but it took me a very long time to realize that I could actually do it myself. But really what it became was a means to have the cathartic experience of undoing all of the damages in my life, the pains that I'd suffered, the traumatic experiences. And it became more a battle with my own self, my own conscious being. And every time I'd hit the bag, as I really started to pummel it, tears would come streaming down my face, because I realized that I was undoing decades, really what amounted to be decades of pain and unresolved issues that had plagued me since childhood.
And I thought it was incredibly compelling to read. So here's somebody who's an athlete, who's accomplished, and yet tears were coming down your face while you were doing it. Now, of course, boxing, I guess, physically helps, because it's a physical exertion. If you get mad at something, go punch a wall. I don't know whose house that is. It could be mine, or it could be Lynn's. Could be both of ours.
It's fun.
Oh, it's yours. Okay.
Brooklyn.
Well, it's not far from the Bronx. Um, and so and of course, how boxing uncaged me was the title of your essay. So whereas you've had that, do you want to share any of the traumas or things that you have
Sure.
exerted outward? Just one or
Yeah.
two.
I had been, sexually assaulted as a teenager. Um, my stepfather sexually abused me as a
I'm so
teenager.
sorry.
I had, it took me a very long time to get past self harm. Not so much outwardly. Thankfully, I didn't come into drugs or alcohol, but there are other ways of doing self harm. And it took me a very long time to become cognizant of that because I was very good at playing the game of being that everything was perfect. But you always pay the price. And it took me until walking into Gleason's gym and really almost in a sense pummeling myself because each time I hit the bag or I hit the pads or even shadow boxing, it was a way of opening up my own scars, to kind of
Wow.
refresh. And every time, every bit of sweat and
So
tear was
so
a way of releasing.
you had now we're recording this on Monday, the 11th. On the
Hmm.
10th, you had an event at Gleason's gym. Is
Yes,
it still significant to walk in that room? And
always.
wow.
It's my home. It's
But
become my home.
it's difficult to hear you even say what happened to you, and I'm sorry to have to repeat that this happens to many people,
To many
and they
people.
and
Yes.
they're dragged down by it. But I guess the key then is to find your way through and
Is to
figure out.
find your way through. I had even come to the point of wanting to end my own life, but
Oh
I
goodness,
found, we have a core in us, and it's a matter of accessing it. And I went to therapy. I mean, all the things
right?
one tries to do, but it was the physical act of gaining my own power, what I call the ring of power,
And
the
and so
extension of your arm into a
and so
fist.
how boxing uncaged me
Uncaged me is to
freed you.
make me release
Um,
into my own life. It helped me to become a writer. Couldn't have
my
written
my
without boxing.
My good friend Lynn Maureen, Dr. Lynn Maureen Hurdle, is a communication expert, a conflict resolution strategist. So easy to say, Lynn, if you do conflict resolution, you could figure this stuff out. As you know you and your family so well. I was very struck to read about the death of your mom and how traumatized you are. Um, Even though you know all this conflict resolution stuff, this was hard for you to get through.
Yeah, well, and it was happening at the same time that I was dealing with the fact that it I was diagnosed with infertility, and so to be losing my mom at a time when it felt like I was losing a good sense of my womanhood as well was really difficult, and then to be losing my mom at a time when we decided to go through and adopt and start a family that way, and then to lose the dream of having a grandmother to really
Right.
spoil my children was extremely traumatic for me. It sent me into a long depression. And it really did, though, in terms of coming out, it sent me to a place where I realized there has to be some good in this. Not that my mom has died, but what has that released me from? And it released me from a lot of the cultural rules and norms of how you raise children, and then how you resolve conflicts and talk to my children and other people about conflicts. And so
And
I
so for you, I mean, you didn't pummel the bag, so to speak, nor did you pummel your neighbors. I'm pleased to say, but you looked within and
yeah,
looked to your family. And of course, I know that my dear friend, your husband, Warren, had passed also another hurdle to
yeah,
overcome, and but it's really looking within yourself, and
yep,
certainly your sons, I know, have are part of this whole picture
that's
as
right.
well. Before we run out of time, Carl, I want to talk with you. You are a He's a physical specimen, ladies and gentlemen. He runs, he hikes, he does all kinds of things. For you, what is the trauma and what made the difference? By the way, it's the difference, essays on lost courage and personal transformation. That's the book. So, Carl, go ahead. Just give us a little bit of that.
Sure. It was a series of events, Gary. It wasn't one tipping point, and and I opened my essay with describing a hike I took a very epic hike I took with one of my brother-in-laws, and he later disappeared in 2014, and that kind of started this series of losses.
And let me just add, that notion leaves an unresolved thing because he disappeared in one of these things that you were, one of these hikes, etc. That you can't resolve that. I'm sorry, I'm not lecturing you, but that's very difficult.
I agree, and
sure you do.
I will tell you this, Gary, that I found that writing this essay, my brother-in-law Paul, who disappeared, never had a funeral and never had an obituary. This piece of the essay to him is my tribute to him, to let the world know about him. It's almost a de facto obituary of him. So it was a series of losses, and I'm careful to note at the outset of my essay the Dennison quote that all sorrows can be borne if you tell a story about them. So that's what I do, but I also make clear that my sorrows are not unique. Everyone experiences them. And the thing that is really gratifying is that people are finding their stories in our stories, in Lynn's story, in Melissa's story, in my story. And the feedback has been phenomenal because I think what this book does, it gives people hope. And that's a good thing. And, as they say in Shawshank, it's maybe the best of things. And so I simply have taken these losses and I've repackaged and repurposed them. And I'm encouraging folks to keep moving, learning, experimenting, exploring, and living.
That's the thing. And I will tell you, I started, I read them. And I started to say to myself, wow, believe me, like everybody else, I got stuff in here that's not always so pleasant. And I said, wait a minute, maybe I ought to figure it out. I mean, I was almost going to go around and ask everybody to give advice, but everybody has their own drama. And I'll tell you this, because we're going to have to go. If you were to meet any one of these three people in the street, you would say, oh, hi, and they would be nice, normal, whatever you want to call it. But every single person has this. So I want to thank each of you. Carl Fix Jr., thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Melissa Smith, thank you. Lynn, I'll see you around town. The book is The Difference. Make a difference in your life. Let's find, as Carl just said, let's find a little hope. Find it within us. Find it in the things you do. Find it in the people around you. There's ways of coping. And if you really have a conflict, talk to Lynn because she can help you with it. Anyway, listen, I love you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for presenting this. And that is how we will conclude the Bronx Buzz for this evening. And so we will tell you, as we always, thanks to Joe Hirsch and to Carl and Melissa and Lynn. And if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, I'll see you next week. Good night.